If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. I'm Eric Senich. Find the podcast online at bookedonrock.com. You can listen to the podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts and watch the episodes on YouTube at Booked on Rock. And make sure you give the podcast a 5-star review and subscribe if you like what you hear, because that gets the podcast out to more listeners. Author Fiona McQuarrie makes her debut on the podcast. Her new book titled Fountains of Wayne. It's the first full-length biography of the band Fountains of Wayne. And this book goes beyond their huge hit Stacy's Mom to explore the group's entire history and the lasting legacy of the group's music. I got to tell you, I knew nothing other than the hit single Stacy's Mom, and man, this is a really good band. Brilliantly written songs. They combine smart pop melodies with lyrical portraits of ordinary life. They've acquired devoted fans all around the world. I'm not surprised after listening to their music, and this book captures the story of this band so well. McQuarrie chronicles the highs and lows of the group's career, demonstrating why the band continues to be admired, listened to, and celebrated. A playlist of Fountains of Wayne in this episode's show notes. Welcome to the podcast, Fiona.
I'm glad to be here.
So I'm adding another band who I knew little to nothing about before this podcast, but now a huge fan of, to my list. Thanks to you.
Excellent.
Thanks to you. Wow, this band is so much more than their hit song.
Absolutely.
So much more.
Absolutely.
And that hit song is Stacy's Mom. Tell us about what led you to writing what is the first full-length biography of this band in particular. Why this band?
Jeff Gomez, who is running the publishing company, actually contacted me and shared with me his new business idea for this series of biographies, short-ish, but still full-length biographies of bands that in the 80s and 90s that had really kind of been overlooked. And he sent me a list. He made a list of, I would say, probably 40 or 50 bands that he thought were possibilities. And Fountains of Wayne jumped out at me right away because I remembered Stacy's Mom, and I also bought Welcome Interstate Managers when it came out. And I remember thinking, this band is really good, and that song is good, but it's not really them. Like, they can do anything. And so I thought, I want to know more. I want to know more about this band and how they came together and how they made these wonderful records. And of course, this was last year. And I also remembered when Adam Schlesinger passed away during the COVID pandemic in 2020 and how upsetting that was because he was so greatly talented. And I thought, this band needs to be remembered for more than Stacy's Mom because they did a lot more. And that's what sort of led to it. And I've spent the past year immersed deep in what my husband and I ended up calling Fountains Land. Sorry, honey, I'm going upstairs to Fountains Land.
Fountains Land. Yeah, we'll get to the formation of the band in just a minute, but let's start with the story of Adam and Chris Collingwood. Adam Schlesinger, Chris Collingwood. There's a popular Fountains of Wayne song called Hackensack, so there is a New Jersey connection to their roots, but also Massachusetts. That's also part of their geographical history. So talk about those two guys and how they ended up meeting and creating all this great music together.
Well, they met at Williams College in Massachusetts, where they both did their undergraduate degrees. And Chris is actually from a small town not too far from Pittsburgh, and Adam is from New York City. And they met at college, and the way they met, the story that they always told was that they were each sitting separately outside on the balcony of their residence, playing their guitars, and Adam was playing an REM song, and Chris decided to come over and tell him he was playing the wrong chords. And that's how they met. And they started hanging out together. Williams is a small college. At the time, it only had about 2,000 students total. And they started playing in bands together and doing events around campus and just hanging out and playing records together and jamming on their own songs. And they started writing together while they were in college. And they tried playing some of their original songs at the campus gigs that they did. And they were both pretty honest in saying that the audiences they played for actually preferred the covers because they had come to hear the hits. When they got close to graduation, they both thought about it, and they both knew from various people that they knew that the music business is very hard and a lot of it is very random, but they didn't really have anything else planned. So they decided to try to make a go of it.
They met in early to mid 90s?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And they had different ways of approaching the songwriting process. And this started way back during the years in college. But they did have a common element. They wrote much like the way Kinks songs were constructed, according to the book.
Yeah, they wrote a lot of their songs were about ordinary people doing ordinary jobs in ordinary offices. And they sort of tried to make that, make those stories that were worth listening to. And I think part of the reason why their songs resonated so strongly with a lot of their listeners is that's what a lot of their listeners in the same age group were doing. They were working temp jobs. They were working in cubicle farms. They had annoying bosses who asked them to do ridiculous things. So they could really relate to the stories of people just living ordinary lives and trying to find some meaning and some happiness in the little things in their lives.
I think that's why these songs, far beyond the hit song, that's why the rest of their catalog is so impressive. There's a lot of depth there, and there's stories of everyday people.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the other thing that often gets overlooked because of Stacy's mom being kind of a one-off is they're also really, really good musicians. Jody Porter, who they brought on as their guitarist, and Brian Young, their drummer, were both very accomplished musicians who had done a lot of things before they joined Fountains of Wayne. And they had the same lineup for their entire existence. So the four musicians really got to know each other and know how to work with each other and shared their experiences. And I think that really comes across in the records too.
Some phenomenal guitar work on some of these songs that I noticed. Now, Adam and Chris, what instruments did they play? Did they share vocals? Talk about that, their roles.
Adam was the bass guitarist, which was pretty impressive because he actually grew up playing piano. He trained in jazz piano. Some of the people who worked with him on other projects say that he could have basically played anything. He was that good of a musician. Chris plays guitar, and he was the Fountains' only lead singer, which also influenced their music too, because one of the things that I talk about in the book is some of the more obsessive Fountains of Wayne fans are really interested in knowing that Adam and Chris pretty much wrote their music independently, is which song was Adam, which song was Chris. And sometimes Adam and Chris would talk about that, but really I think it doesn't, in some sense, it doesn't matter because Chris being the only singer meant that Adam had to write for Chris. He had to write for his vocal range and for his style of singing. So Adam wrote differently in Fountains of Wayne than he did in many of the other projects that he did. So Adam and Chris wrote independently, and yes, they've both talked about songs that they primarily wrote, and this only changed a little bit once it came to the whole band to be played. But it wasn't an individual enterprise by any means. It was the talents and the input of all four of them that made the songs as good as they are, I think.
They were both approaching 30, I think, when they formed Fountains of Wayne, and then I guess still a handful of years away from their breakthrough hit. They must have been wondering if their time would come. There were some solid bands that they had some chances at success. I believe it was Pinwheel and Seed were a couple band names mentioned in the book, and there were record label signings. What happened with those projects?
I was thinking about this while I was putting the book together, and there were so many bands in that era in the late 80s going into the early mid 90s. There were a lot of really good bands that had one wonderful song that was a hit, but they also had a lot of other wonderful songs that never got heard. It seems to have been an era where record companies were really signing a lot of bands and trying to a greater or lesser degree to make them long-term acts. And for some of them, it just didn't work out. And Fountains of Wayne had a lot of college radio airplay with their first album. And when it came to the second album, there was some uptake, but not as much, although it was a really good album, Utopia Parkway. And their record company dumped them. And so they were left without a label, exhausted from having worked pretty much 4 years straight with both records. And at that point, they were really questioning whether they should keep going. But they decided to keep writing songs and getting together and doing things. They had some jobs that I can talk about that were actually an interesting part of their history that I didn't know. They got signed to do the music for a VH1 cartoon series called Hey Joel. And Joel was Joel Stein, who was a columnist for Time magazine at the time. And Joel's shtick was that in Time magazine was that he wrote really sarcastic articles about overblown celebrities who are full of themselves. And sometimes he was really funny. Other times it was like, yeah, we know this person is an ass. We don't need someone to point it out to us. So anyway, Fountains of Wayne got signed to write the music for this series. VH1 commissioned 13 episodes of it. They wrote 2 songs per episode, and they also had done the theme song. VH1, when it was finished, decided they didn't like the series and they sat on it. It was played in Canada. Yay, I remember seeing it because it was partly financed with Canadian television money. They made enough money off that job that they could pay for themselves to go into the studio and make their own album. So they were in the very nice position. I mean, I'm sure they were still, counting their pennies, but they were in the very nice position of being able to work on an album at their own pace without a record company telling them, I don't hear a single, and to just develop what they wanted to do. And once the album was finished, they were able to shop it around, which made them a much more attractive prospect for a record company because they already had the album. The company didn't have to sign them and hope that the album would be good. That's how Welcome Interstate Managers came into the world. It was a weird set of circumstances, but it actually worked out very well for them.
They had about 30 songs, I think, written, ready for that third album.
They did, yep.
Yeah, that was a huge break, that television show. Adam and Chris, the talents that they had, they could have continued to make money on side projects. I mean, they had so many things going on. They were just super talented guys.
Yeah, that was actually quite a challenge in the book. Is I had to be really conscious of focusing on Fountains of Wayne because Adam in particular did so many outside projects that I really had to work hard not to get the narrative diverted into what Adam was doing. Although I did divert a bit for the musical of Crybaby. That was sort of self-indulgent because I'm one of the few people who saw it during its very short Broadway run. So I felt it deserves some recognition.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
I'm going to need some pliers and a set of 30-weight ball bearings.
What?
If Fred gets here before I'm back, you can tell him to start without me.
What the hell you need ball bearings for?
Oh, come on, guys. It's so simple. Maybe you need a refresher course. Hey, it's all ball bearings nowadays.
I mentioned the New Jersey connection. There's a connection there with the name. What's behind that name? And how does the newly emerging online internet search era also help put the stamp of approval on this name? It's a very Googleable name. Did I say that? Did I pronounce that?
Yes.
Googleable.
They were named after a home furnishing outdoor goods store in the town of Wayne, which I have not personally been to. The store, unfortunately, is closed now. But the story, again, that they used to tell was that Adam's mom, who worked as an arts publicist, was driving past this store and saw the sign and thought, oh, that's a really distinctive name. You should call your band that. They went back and forth on it. It's an unusual name, and neither of them were totally in love with it. But it was a distinctive name. One other thing that they did also is they went to the Fountains of Wayne store and asked them if this was okay. Adam said that at first when the store owners got the request, they thought it would be some hardcore gangster rap group wanting to use the name. But when it turned out it was just 2 nice suburban guys and their friends, then they were okay with it.
That's awesome. Stacy's mom off that third album, 2003's Welcome Interstate Managers, but 2 really good albums that come before that. Talk about the first album from 96. That's the self-titled debut. The label was looking for another Pearl Jam, but that's not what Chris and Adam were going to give him. This was power pop. How was the album received critically and commercially? And then what kind of help did they get from the Atlantic label? It didn't seem like they were behind it enough.
Well, the critics loved it. And Chris has said in later years that it's the sound of 2 young guys drunk in the city having fun. And that's sort of the vibe that comes across from it. Atlantic liked it enough to promo it to, they initially pushed Fountains as a alternative act because there were college stations, there were alternative stations with an alternative format in mainstream radio. And it did well enough that the label let them do a second album. It's interesting, though, that even though that album, that first album, wasn't a hit per se, they played songs from it throughout their entire career. So it was really strong in the songwriting, and the fans really liked the song. And it got them enough attention that the label was willing to invest in a second album. But no, they weren't Pearl Jam. They hated grunge. They thought it was just noisy chords and guys grunting and moaning over top of it. And they didn't want to be a grunge band for sure.
Radiation Vibe's a good song. Sink to
It's
the
a
Bottom,
beautiful-
Survival Car, Barbara H., Leave the Biker. They're all solid songs. I picked the ones that were, I think I picked the ones that are singles for the episode playlist, but also ones that were popular on Spotify among the fans too. So I think I put together a nice collection, but you can let me know, Fiona, when you see it. But it was a two-man creation to start, essentially, but then to tour, they needed to get a band. So this is where we see the full lineup come together?
That's right. That's
first?
when
Okay.
Jody and Brian joined them. And they also kind of had an unofficial fifth member. Adam's friend, Stephen Gould, toured with them quite a bit as a keyboard player because Adam was busy playing bass, so he couldn't really do the keyboard stuff that was on the albums.
They toured with the Smashing Pumpkins in 97.
They did.
Then they did some headlining shows in smaller venues after that. But it's interesting to read about. Adam had written a song, That Thing You Do, for the movie of the same name with Tom Hanks. People, I'm sure many who are listening to this and watching this recognize that one. But there was a reason it wasn't played live by Fountains of Wayne. Why was that?
Because it wasn't a Fountains of Wayne song. I think Adam
Easy
was
enough.
was very conscious throughout his career that about keeping his other work separate from his Fountains of Wayne work. I think that was a smart decision. I mean, I guess they could have got some mileage out of playing it, but it wasn't their song. None of them performed on it except Adam. And gosh, Adam got nominated for a Golden Globe and an Oscar for that song. So there was
Amazing.
a lot of potential publicity value, but it was not a Fountains of Wayne song. And to say they didn't want to associate themselves with it sounds like it's an awful song, which it isn't. It's a wonderful song, but they were very clear about establishing their own identity as a band, despite one of their members having done this other project that was getting a lot of attention.
What do you think about that pairing with Smashing Pumpkins? Was that a good idea?
I think it was at that stage of their career because that's when Smashing Pumpkins were quite big and they got to play arenas, which they wouldn't have done if they had been booked on their own. Now, admittedly, they were the opening act. So, they had the little space at the front of the stage with one spotlight and 45 minutes. And we all know that a lot of people show up for the headliners and don't bother showing up for the opening acts, which their loss. But I think it was a good way to get them out there, to get some audiences to see them. And part of what it also helped with is, I think something that often gets overlooked in what bands do is it's not just the albums and it's not just the touring. There's also the whole publicity side of it. Doing interviews over the phone, doing interviews at radio stations, doing interviews in person. One of their peers in the band, Semisonic, Irish Schlichter, has written his autobiography about his time in that band. And he talks about having to spend entire afternoons in a sound booth saying, "Hi, I'm Ira from Semisonic, and you're listening to XFM." That sort of work doesn't often get put into what bands do in terms of their commitments and their energy. And so going out as an opening act, you play first and you play for 45 minutes, but you also go to cities where you can meet radio people and promotion people and media. So it's a good way to get your name and your presence out there as a new band.
It's got to be exhausting, though, answering the same
Exhausting,
questions over and over and over again. Got to have a lot of patience.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things I did in structuring the book was I had a big fat notebook and I had a couple of pages for each year. And just to help me figure out where they were at particular times, I listed all the dates that I could find records of them having played. I was exhausted just writing down all those dates. They played live a lot. It is exhausting. I mean, it's not just the 45 minutes or the hour and a half of people adoring you and clapping and screaming your name. It's also getting the gear in and out, getting to the hotel, maybe getting some sleep, getting on the bus or the plane, and then doing all the promotional work on top of it. It is exhausting.
Nowadays, you have to do the social media thing, these bands and artists.
That's exactly right. Like
post something every day, well, what am I going to post? Anything. Just,
just
you're going for a walk with your dog, put that out there. It's like, okay, I guess I'll do that.
Well, it's interesting that their careers sort of started out when, if you wanted a record, you went down to the record store and bought it, or if you wanted to hear a single, you listened to it on the radio and you had a radio. And by the time they did their last album, which was 2011, it came out on Bandcamp, and you could stream it online, and just how the whole industry transformed in that time. Fascinating.
That's a quote I was going to read in here too. You read it in the book. The Fountains' career coincided with a time of massive evolution in the music industry. That's when vinyl's being replaced by CDs. You got the World Wide Web, online file sharing, MySpace, Napster, MTV still big, iTunes, media corporatization and concentration. They were in such a bizarre period. And really the last great era of rock and roll being mainstream. Even they had that difficulty of, where are we going to fit?
Mm-hmm.
Where do we
and
fit
how
in?
are people going to find us?
Sure.
If, there's streaming, there's video, there's downloads, and also anyone, can put something up on SoundCloud and promote it. And how do you get heard amongst all that? Noise is a bit harsh, but you know what I mean? There's just so much content out there. How does a new band or a new artist get themselves heard?
Yeah. And then I think it was Chris, towards the end of the book, you quote him as saying, after they made it with their big hit, times are changing again. And he's like, I just don't know where we fit in with this. This would have been like early 2000s, maybe. Where do we fit in now? It's like a constantly moving target until you could build up a loyal fan base. They had a pretty loyal fan base, though, huh?
They had they have
to this day
loyal fan base. Yep.
Which we've got some good news at the end of this interview to share. That's really cool. Really cool. Author Fiona McQuarrie making her debut on the podcast. Her book is titled Fountains of Wayne, the first full-length biography of the band Fountains of Wayne. Second album, 1999's Utopia Parkway. Quite an impressive collection of songs, a thematic approach to the music. It was about life in suburbia and an ambitious young man with dreams. I think that was the overall theme, and they were proud of the songs, including the lead single, Denise. But this single sparked a conflict between the band and Atlantic.
Oh, yeah. So while they were doing the sessions for Utopia Parkway, they recorded, just, I think as a laugh, they recorded a version of Britney Spears' Baby One More Time. And they did it as sort of a stripped down acoustic ballad. They did it just for, they did it. And the record label heard about it. And the record label said, oh, we're going to make that the single. They did not want it as the single. First, because it wasn't their song. And secondly, because they didn't want to be tagged as the guys who did that weird cover of the Britney Spears song. The record company wanted to put it on the B-side of the Denise single, and the Fountains said no. So the record company refused to put out the single, and it kind of went sideways from there. I think that might be one of the turning points at which their relationship with that particular label started to go a little bit off the rails.
Howard Stern got his hands on it. And he played it, right?
He might have got it off Napster because it also popped up as a file on Napster.
That just made things worse for him. Yeah.
Yep.
It's like, now he's such a huge audience. Yeah.
Yep.
So critical praise, growing fan base, including Elton John, by the way, which is so cool to read. He loved the band, hated how the label didn't support them enough. They end up signing with the new label, S-Curve Records.
Yeah.
That all happens thanks to that project you mentioned, that VH1 project. They got the music to get behind that.
Yep.
So now we get to Welcome Interstate Managers. It blows up in the summer of 2003. Stacy's Mom, number 21 single on Billboard, all over MTV. So tell us the story behind the song. Who wrote it? Who is it inspired by?
Adam wrote it. He wrote the first version of it. It was inspired by something he talked about in his adolescence when one of his friends told him his grandma was hot. And he sort of used that as the stepping off point for the song. they recorded it obviously in the Welcome Interstate Manager session, and they were reluctant to have it as a single because they thought, it's about what we would now call an MLIF. It's going to be a novelty song. I don't know, it doesn't really represent who we are as a band, which is true. But also, if you look at the range of tracks on Welcome Interstate Managers, I mean, there's a country song on there. There's a really loopy and hippie psychedelic track. There are a lot of songs that don't represent what they are as a band because they did so many different styles. But I could see the reluctance, especially since, if you watched MTV, or in my case, Much Music, back in the days, there were a lot of videos with women, rolling around on car hoods and running around in bikinis under sprinklers and stuff like that. And they didn't want to be one of those bands, They
didn't even want to make a video for it, right?
Yep. But the record label played the track for the head of MTV, and she said, "This sounds good. Let's make a good video." So the record company shelled out a lot of money. They got Rachel Hunter, who was actually the band's first choice. They thought, oh, I wonder if Rachel Hunter would do this. And they contacted her, and she said, yeah, sure. I have to say that at that point, personally, I had enough of women in bikinis running around in videos, like play the damn song. But I like the Stacy's Mom video a lot. I think it manages to have that aspect of the song, but it also makes fun of it. I mean, it makes fun of the ridiculous depictions of women in songs about being lustful. I think it did a really fine job of balancing those two extremes.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
The future is now!
Chapter 8, titled A Strange and Foreign Place, and you lead with, quote, although it was exciting for Fountains of Wayne to finally have a hit single, the band was realistic about what the success of Stacy's Mom might mean for their careers in the long run. There was the follow-up to Welcome Interstate Manager's album featuring Stacy's Mom, which was 2007's Traffic and Weather, and this explored in detail in the book, but you say Traffic and Weather has its moments, but it lacked the verve and confidence of earlier records. Critics were lukewarm as well with their response to it?
Yeah, it got mixed responses. I think by that time, the record reviewers who knew who Fountains of Wayne were knew what excellent songwriters and musicians they were. And they really tried to be positive about it. But it was a very troubled record, partly because Chris Collingwood had a bad episode of mental health while they were on tour. And that sort of led to him not being able to contribute as much to the albums as he usually did. Most of the songs on that album were written by Adam. And I think because they sort of had the weight of expectations of, let's have another hit single, partly because the follow-up single to Stacy's Mom, Mexican Wine, hadn't been successful, that the record company was really expecting, great things this time around. So they were not in a totally happy place when they made this record. And I think it shows in the record itself. But there are some songs that are tremendous, and there are others that are kind of space filler. I mean, I don't think Fountains of Wayne ever made a really bad song, but there are definitely songs that are not up to the usual standard, I think.
And then Sky Full of Holes from 2011, the last studio album. In fact, before we started recording, there was a song I mentioned I'm a fan of from that album. What was the one again about the dipping your toes in the ocean?
The dip in the ocean, yeah.
Dip in the ocean. I mean, there's, again, some great songs on there, but lukewarm reviews, did okay. And it seemed like for Adam, now in his 40s, with children, things were changing. Chris, as I mentioned earlier, this is where his quote is in the book about he's not sure where the band's music's going to fit in, as they get into the 2010s. Adam was quoted in 2013 saying he and Chris were thinking about making another record. That never happened. And it seems like it was really due mostly to the fact that maybe Chris and Adam both, they had successful careers on their own now. So that was keeping him very busy. Music for TV, film, Broadway, as you mentioned. Is that the reason why you think the two never reformed Fountains of Wayne?
I think it was partly that, but also they both said, and Jodie Porter has said this as well, that making Sky Full of Holes was really a challenging process for them because Adam wanted to keep along with the sort of the lighthearted songs, well, not completely lighthearted, but the songs with the pop culture references and that sort of thing. And Chris, especially having gone through his mental health challenges, basically didn't want to be the funny band anymore. He wanted to write about more serious things. And some of the songs on Sky Full of Holes are about, like, the title song is about a military funeral. The metaphor that the title is from is the idea that the guns go off at the military funeral as a tribute to the fallen, and they make holes in the sky. And within the band, there were some pretty big discussions about, is this really a Fountains of Wayne song? Is this what our fans are going to like? So I think they were at a point where there were different visions of what the band could be. And I think what Sky Full of Holes shows is they could do funny songs and they could do more serious songs, but the album didn't gel quite as well as some of the previous ones did, even though some of the previous ones had song styles that were all over the place too. And like you say, they were in their 40s and they'd been playing together since they were 18. And just like, if you work at a workplace for that long, or you have friends that you know for that long, you're not the same people that you were 30 years later. And sometimes people just grow apart and want to do different things and go out on their own.
Then the terrible news 2020, chapter 13, titled Unwelcome Fate, leads with, quote, 2020 was a terrible year. Was it ever?
Yeah.
The year started off great for Adam. One day he's out for a walk with his girlfriend, and the next he has COVID. And then
he thought he had the flu, and his girlfriend took care of him, and then he didn't get better, and she figured he should go to the hospital. And I had to take my time writing that chapter because it was pretty upsetting. And, I never met him and I didn't know him personally, but just how random it was and how awful it was. And I point out in the book, literally tens of thousands of people around the world died that same week. But Adam was so talented and had done so much for someone of a relatively young age. It was just such a loss. It was so sad.
I remember seeing the headline in Rolling Stone, and I remember hearing about people that I knew in my own day-to-day life, people in town, and that's, you realize, like, this is serious. This is, this is, it was such a surreal time, like Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
How did you find out?
I think I saw it online, and it was a really sad week in our house also, because my husband is a huge John Prine fan, and so am I. And John Prine passed away that same week, and we're like, what else is going to happen? Like, how much worse can this possibly get? At the same time, this isn't in the book because it's not, I didn't want to drag my own story into it. But my dad had passed away the week before, not from COVID, but while he was in the hospital, everyone was wearing masks, and you could tell that things were getting really, really serious. So it's like, what next? What next?
But you're able to end with good news in this book. You emailed me, I think it was a few weeks ago, and you sent me a new updated epilogue, which came just as the book is going to press. I'll let you tell the rest.
I wrote the book on the assumption that things were pretty much done for Fountains of Wayne, because they hadn't made a record since 2011. They hadn't played any reunion shows even before Adam passed away. They did one gig for a online COVID benefit for New Jersey after Adam passed. But otherwise, that was it. So I thought it was a pretty safe assumption that I could write this book in the past. So I finished the manuscript. I sent it off to Jeff, the publisher. I get up one morning and I open my phone and I go on Facebook, and I'm tagged in all these posts, and I'm like, what is going on? So I opened the post, and it Fountains of Wayne announced reunion show, and I went, oh. Half of me went, oh my God, this is fantastic. And the other half of me went, are you effing kidding me? Now I have to rewrite the damn book.
Exactly. Oh my God. Yeah.
So luckily the file had not gone to the printers yet. So Jeff was able to hold it back, and I had 3 or 4 days to rewrite all the parts that needed to be rewritten. And
Okay, who's going to be taking on Adam's place? Is it all of the guys from the band before? What's the lineup?
It's Chris and Jody and Brian, and their friend Stephen Gold, who I mentioned before, who's played keyboards with them live on several tours. And the new boy is Max Collins. He was in a band called Eve 6. He also played in a side
I remember
project.
Eve 6.
Yeah, he was in a side project with Brian. He's a huge fan of Fountains of Wayne. He's actually done a couple of power pop podcasts where he's talked about how much he likes them. So he's a pretty good choice. He's also a very good bass player. And it's also been announced that Adam's family were consulted about this project, and they've given it their blessing. So it's probably about as good a scenario as you could expect. Now, they've only announced 2 shows so far, both at festivals over the summertime. And of course, the fans and selfishly myself are hoping that if they put in the time and effort to rehearse for 2 festival gigs, that maybe they might do some gigs on their own as well. So
we'll see.
Because I never got to see them when they were an active band. So
all right. And the book the release date is March 13, and you can find it wherever books are sold, and people can find you where online, Fiona?
I'm on X/Twitter as Writing on Music, and that's also my website, writingonmusic.com. And I also put in a plug for my publisher, J-Card Press. You can order the book directly from the publisher if you don't want to give Jeff Bezos your money. If you order the book from the publisher, you get a special bookmark.
Cool. Yeah, we've been in touch back and forth. He was asking if I had read the book, I think maybe a couple weeks ago, and it was like a day or 2 before I was going to start reading. And then a couple days after that, I emailed him like, damn, man, this band is good. And this book is outstanding. I mean, really, it was really well written.
Thank
and
you.
I can't imagine the fans being disappointed at this one. So Fiona McQuarrie, thank you so much for coming on and talking about the book.
Thank you, Eric. And thank you for supporting authors, because just like musicians, there's a lot of stuff out there and it's sometimes hard to get noticed. So what you do is a great help.
Thank you.
That's it. It's in the books.